Welcome to a special Catholic Forum presentation. I'm your host, Deacon Jim Thorndell. Instead of hosting a conversation on today's show, it's my pleasure to introduce excerpts from a powerful presentation we are fortunate to have recorded. This presentation was recorded as part of the series of Fortnight For Freedom evenings prayer at St. Isidore's Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan that took place in June and July of 2014. You can check the parish website at www.saintisidorechurch.org. with saint spelled out, so that's www.saintisidorechurch.org to find the full-length presentation. Please enjoy speaker Leonard Grotenrath, independent Catholic scholar and former vice president of the Right to Life Michigan Political Action Committee, as he presents The Sky Grows Darker Yet.
An explanation is in order about the title of this talk, The Sky Grows Darker Yet. Some few of you will have recognized that the words are taken from Gilbert Keith Chesterton's 1911 epic poem, The Ballad of the White Horse. The ballad recounts the valiant struggles of the Christian king Alfred of Wessex against the pagan Danes, whose eyes were blue and blind, and who in the turbulent years of the 9th century invaded England and threatened the very existence of the nascent Christian culture that had taken root in England following the dissolution of the Roman Imperium. All but defeated and close to despair, King Alfred is granted a visitation by the Virgin Mary. Seeking heaven's assurance that the Christian cause will prevail, he receives instead a cryptic lesson concerning the mystery of providence and the working out of God's will in the crucible of history. Alfred, warrior, scholar, and king, is reminded by the Queen of Heaven that God's ways are not man's ways, that God's purposes are veiled in the temporal order, and that human destiny lies hidden in the inscrutable will of God. Christians are to walk boldly by faith, not by sight, in joy born of hope, always under the shadow of the cross, with its unbearable burden and its bright but future promise. Listen to the Queen's words to the desperate, imploring king. The men of the East may spell the stars in times and triumphs mark, but the men signed of the cross of Christ go gaily in the dark. The men of the East may search the scrolls for sure fates and fame, but the men that drink the blood of God go singing to their shame. The wise men know all evil things under the twisted trees, where the perverse in pleasure pine, and men are weary of green wine and sick of crimson seas. But you and all the kind of Christ are ignorant and brave, and you have wars you hardly win, and souls you hardly save. I tell you not for your comfort, yea, not for your desire, save that the sky grows darker yet, and the sea rises higher. I've chosen tonight to employ Chesterton's ballad as a literary prism through which we may view our present-day engagement with an increasingly hostile culture, and to draw upon its deep wisdom and Catholic spirit for both insight and inspiration. And naught was left King Alfred but shameful tears of rage in the island in the river in the end of all his age. In the island in the river he was broken to his knee, and he writ with an iron pen that God had wearied of Wessex men and given their country field and fen to the devils from the sea. That America is morphing into something ugly and unfamiliar, I'm going to take as a given, a premise which I presume, perhaps without justification, you share with me. When not too long ago His Eminence the Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago, Francis George, was quoted as saying that he expected to die in his bed, but that his successor would likely die in prison, and his successor die a martyr, there were those who dismissed such talk as unwarranted hyperbole. Indeed, histrionic rhetoric of the kind associated with cranks and others on the fringes of polite society, who are always warning us that the sky is falling. I, for one, welcome the Cardinal's candor. His eyes may or may not be blue, but they are definitely not blind. No, the sky isn't falling, but it is darkening. And I salute the Cardinal for giving utterance, prophetic utterance, to a truth that we need to hear, to recognize, and to confront with clear-eyed Christian realism and a firm faith and an indefatigable hope. A faith that is muscular, militant, lyrical, and mystical. In short, the faith that comes down to us from the apostles, the fathers, the learned doctors, the faithful confessors, the holy virgins, the blessed martyrs, monks and mystics, Benedict and Dominic, Ignatius, Francis and Clare, John of the Cross and Teresa, Fisher and Moore, Pro and Colby, and the whole cloud of witnesses who shaped the res catholica, the Catholic thing that you and I, by unbought grace, now profess in creed and celebrate in sacred cult, and whose code is the law of liberty and love's sure sign and signature. Now it so happens that I do not share in the same uncritical view of the American myth of religious freedom that animates so many of my fellow Catholics. It is my considered view that in appealing to the American ideal of religious freedom, an ideal that belies the historical record and covers over the philosophically incoherent premises that served as its foundation, Catholics succumb yet again to a false narrative, one that American Catholics have too eagerly and too uncritically embraced. One born of a desire to demonstrate to their fellow citizens who do not share the faith that we Catholics can be good Republicans, good Americans, every bit as committed to the American creed as the most ardent Reformed Protestant or the most smug Enlightenment liberal. So I find myself in the paradoxical position of being someone who views the putative right to religious freedom as mythical, but who nonetheless views the incipient threats to that myth as all too real, all too ominous, all too pregnant with portents that bode ill for the future. Portents that can lead a cardinal to dispense with the faux optimism that says it can't happen here. This is America. And to speak uncomfortable truths in uncertain times. The barometric pressure of our culture's turbulent atmosphere will continue to fall, and we should brace for the coming storm. Praemonitas, praemunitas. To be forewarned is to be forearmed. Doubtless more than a few of you are troubled by my skepticism regarding the ideal and the idea of religious freedom in its American form. Allow me to rehearse briefly some recent history which may help illuminate why I am disposed to offer up at least, or at best, one rather tepid cheer for the American understanding of religious freedom. What I refer to as the myth of religious freedom has, like all myths, a history. But a very crucial part of that history is of recent vintage. Following World War II, American Catholics found themselves in very unusual circumstances. Catholics who throughout the history of America had always been the focus of suspicion and treated as aliens people who were enthralled by priestcraft and who secretly owed allegiance to a foreign potentate, suddenly achieved a measure of respect. The general relief that followed upon a successful conclusion to a terrible war and the advent of a burgeoning prosperity that seemed so promising for a bright future contributed to this unusual state of affairs. During this period of religious and civic comity, and in large measure due to its benign influence, the brilliant Jesuit political theologian John Courtenay Murray undertook the task of demonstrating not only that the Church's compatibility with American ideals and practices, but even urged the Church to embrace the American view of church-state relations, a view that was at the very least prima facie, on the face of it, contrary to the judgment of the papal social magisterium of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Ironically, exhibiting the kind of subtlety that had for most of our history earned the Jesuits the enmity of Protestant America, Murray set about to reconstitute the received myth of the American founding, situated on a firmer foundation than had been erected by its Reformed Protestant and moderate Enlightenment progenitors. The American hierarchy, which for years, especially during the 19th century, had squabbled over just how far a Catholic could go in accepting the American way and still remain a Catholic, seized upon Murray's sophisticated and satisfying, to them anyway, reconciliation of Catholicism with Americanism. Just to illustrate how different the period of, say, the early decades of the 20th century to the mid-1960s was from previous periods in our history, and from our own, let me serve up a few tidbits. The wife of Henry Luce, the Rupert Murdoch of his era, Clare Booth Luce, was received into the Catholic Church in this period by one Monsignor Fulton J. Sheen to general public acclaim. The same Monsignor Sheen, whose television show, A Life Worth Living, was viewed enthusiastically by vast numbers of Protestants, graduates of Fordham University, a Catholic school in the Jesuit tradition, accounted for most of the personnel of the FBI, where, as one wag observed, they spent their careers spying on the graduates of Harvard University. Even Hollywood was producing feel-good movies that portrayed Catholicism in a favorable light. And this is the time frame in which Murray wrote and advanced his famous defense of the Articles of Peace between the Church and the state in pluralist America. Articles that guaranteed religious freedom within the juridical order and left all those complicated metaphysical and theological issues swirling around questions of the true religion and the duty of the state with respect to it to be endlessly and politely debated over tea or single malt, whatever your preference, within the sphere of the social order, wherein persuasion and not compulsion was the proper mode of conduct. This bracketing of the controversial and admittedly complex metaphysical and theological questions by Father Murray puts me in mind of Francois Arouet Voltaire's humorous dismissal of scholastic metaphysics, which for him were utterly opaque. Quand celui à qui l'on parle ne comprend pas et celui qui parle ne se comprend pas, c'est de la métaphysique. The translation, and attend carefully, when neither the speaker nor his audience understands what the speaker means, that is metaphysics. Father Murray was himself a fair metaphysician, as his explication of the metaphysical ground of the natural moral law, which appears in his book, We Hold These Truths, amply demonstrates. Father Murray, like the good liberal he evidently was, believed that one could exempt the juridical order from its proper ordination to an intrinsic dependence upon what is an existential unity in the ontological order, wherein being is the rule and the measure of thinking, the real is the pediment of the conceptual. The truth of any judgment is that judgment's conformity to what is and not the other way around. The ontological measures the epistemological. At this point, you're all thinking Voltaire had it right. Commenting upon John Courtney Murray, my teacher Frederick Williamson said that when one discusses Murray's thesis, which he had set forth in many journal articles and in his justly famous book just alluded to, a book written in 1960, we hold these truths. One must be attentive not just to the history in the book, but to the history englobing the book. Murray could write what he did because the times in which he wrote served to render his suppositions plausible. To borrow from the great Lutheran sociologist Peter Berger, there were in place sufficient plausibility structures within the culture of that period to sustain Murray's argument. But alas, those dour German biblical scholars were proved yet again to be correct. We are all of us, even brilliant Jesuit scholars like Murray, zeitgebunden. That is to say, time-bound. The optimism that buoyed and braced Murray, and we might add as a throwaway, suffused the later Vatican II pastoral constitution, Gaudium et Spes, was not destined to survive the 60s. The rest of that story is all too well known to us, and there is no need to recount it in its depressing detail. Today we are being drawn inexorably into a confrontation, not with an old and brutal paganism from across sunlit seas, but with bureaucrats and barristers who brandish laser-printed court decrees the way real men of manlier times once wielded bright swords and sharpened steel. Even so, these new and neutered legates of the swollen modern state effect with equal malice the stripping of the public square of any sign or symbol of the sacred and the transcendent. Like poor Wessex, besieged and ravaged, our towns were shaken of tall kings with scarlet beards like blood. The world turned empty where they trod. They took the kindly cross of God and cut it up for wood. The intersection of religion and politics is never free of tension, as history demonstrates. The Protestant Reformation shattered what was left of the unity of the Catholic res publica, the political order that had grown up in the rich loam of that era, that was in soul and sinew Catholic and Christian, and which is lauded or derided as Christendom. The Middle Ages had their own difficulties, to be sure, but witnessed at their best a remarkable configuration within its institutional diversity that honored the distinction between authority and power, the former being the prerogative of the Holy Church of God, and the latter the prerogative of the consecrated kings of Christendom. Today, the Church has been divested not only of any power in the public sphere, but has been isolated and marginalized to such an extent that its divine commission to speak the truth, and to speak the truth to power, which is the function of authority in the public realm, has been so compromised and attenuated as to leave the Church as little more than a sect, as impotent as any other sect, which, and I must be candid here, is precisely what the liberals who devised the American approach to religious freedom intended. Whether one opts for Madison or Jefferson's view of religious freedom, the truth of the matter is that both estimable gentlemen were concerned not with freeing religion, but with taming it, and depriving it of any claim to authority over the state. They spoke eloquently of the need for religious sanction to undergird and promote the virtues that were instrumental and indispensable to the proper and successful undertaking of Republican government. But like all true liberals, denied the legitimacy of any claim to knowledge of the good, at least any good, by virtue of its truth, would be prior to and binding upon the autonomous wills of free men whose right to think and to act could be circumscribed only with their consent. The history of Catholicism in America has been characterized by a tension that has waxed and waned, and which is now growing increasingly taut. We no longer feel at ease in an America that is unraveling. It doesn't feel like home anymore. And our fellow countrymen were not altogether wrong in suggesting that we Catholics have a divided loyalty. What genuine Christian could claim otherwise? The time may be approaching when we are confronted with a difficult choice. It really isn't a new choice, though, if we think about it. When Peter told the Jewish authorities that the church must obey God rather than men, he pretty much emptied the question of any nagging doubt what we must do when put in a position where we must choose between the city of God and the city of man. We know our duty. We know, too, that the love of one's patria, one's country, is both natural and virtuous, but can become a form of idolatry if we allow it to supersede that love which must inform all our earthly loves, lest they become something else, something unworthy of us. I speak of that love which rightly orders all other lesser loves to itself as to their source and finality, the love that moves the sun and all the stars, as Dante so beautifully described it. Doubtless, you have all seen or read Robert Bolt's magnificent play, A Man for All Seasons, about Sir Thomas More. Do you recall More's response to his daughter, Margaret, when she tries to dissuade him from his course, his adamant refusal to swear an oath that would make him complicit in the king's unlawful usurpation of the authority of Holy Church? He says, "Then perhaps we must stand fast a little, even at the risk of being heroes." It is a mixed blessing that America has succeeded in leaching out of its citizens those human and political passions that too frequently lead men to commit folly and foment all manner of evil in the world. Historically, America has channeled the restless drive that agitates within the human heart of fallen man and which whispers to him of his being's radical contingency by focusing on material pursuits and sensorial happiness. We were founded as a commercial republic, and commercial activity fills the void that otherwise might become home to other, far less benign passions. But one may recognize this and still lament the equal dampening of even rightly ordered desire, the kind of desire engendered by a love that aches for its fulfillment by giving of itself to higher purposes and nobler pursuits than mere material enrichment. Chesterton famously said of St. Francis that his faith wasn't a thing like a theory, but a thing like a love affair. Unless we begin to fan the flame of that kind of faith, we will have neither light nor warmth to ward off the deepening darkness and the coming chill of a culture rapidly succumbing to the relentless onslaught of a new barbarism, no less threatening for all that its harbingers are attired in Armani ties, in sport Rolex watches, in lieu of gorget and gauntlet. We must come to know ourselves again in a conscious act of recovery and renewal. We must hear the words of Blessed Peter and accept the burden of the dignity that has been bestowed upon us. For you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a consecrated nation, a people set apart. We must welcome the coming spiritual battle and bless the Lord, who favors us with this opportunity to prove our worthiness to bear the name of Christ. But the battle must be fought for our foes as well as against them. And we must fight as fiercely for their souls as we do to defeat them, heedful of that example given us by St. Thomas More, who prayed daily for his enemies, that he and they might be saved souls together in heaven. Any battle fought beneath the banners of Christ the King may never be waged with bitterness nor marred with hatred. It is not with curses that we enter the fray, but rather with the giant laughter of Christian men and the sure knowledge of why we must fight. In the heat of the climactic battle of Ethandune, Alfred is yet again on the verge of despair, seeing the Christian armies battered and blooded and near defeat. He is distracted suddenly by a great light that draws his attention. He saw Our Lady then, and she was a queen, most womanly, but she was a queen of men. Her eyes were sad without an art, and 7 swords were in her heart, but one was in her hand. Out of the mouth of the Mother of God, more than the doors of doom, I call the muster of Wessex men, from grassy hamlet or ditch and den, to break and be broken, God knows when. But I have seen for whom. Out of the mouth of the Mother of God, like a little word come I, for I go gathering Christian men from sunken paving and ford and fen, to die in a battle God knows when, by God, but I know why. And at the last, please God, the giant laughter of Christian men will in the end again win out. So let it be. Amen.